Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the book release of Lunch Break, a pandemic-era romantic suspense. My name is Serge Markarian, and I'll be your host tonight. We'll have author Liza Andrews and our guest specialist, Dr. Ann Turner, discussing the book and the topic, romantic relationships and adultery during the pandemic. Lunch Break was picked up by big retail chains like Walmart and Waterstones in London, among other bookshops around the globe, and Amazon reviewers are calling it addictive, a psychological portrait of quarantine and marvelous characters with insane obsessions and unpredictable situations. So let's start our conversation with Liza. Author Liza Andrews has worked in the United States, Europe, and South America, and had a diversified career, including business training, fiction writing, and professional photography. She wrote the romantic suspense Lunch Break and co-authoring the suspense Facelift that will be released next month. Good evening, Liza.
Hey, thank you. Very happy to be here with everybody.
Of course. Liza, question number one for you. What was your inspiration for this plot?
Well, I wanted to discuss the social impacts of the pandemic, especially the domestic tension that took place during quarantine. I think all of us here remember how horrible, how hard it was working from home, having our partners and kids there 24/7. It was hard for everybody. So add the fear of this new disease and the financial concerns, and it's a recipe for disaster. So no wonder that in the past 2 years, almost 30% of the world population has filed for divorce. I thought that was very alarming to me. And many of them had online affairs. Even when they didn't actually act on it, they were at least flirting, trying to hear something different, even if only to have that thrill of feeling young and attractive again. That was very common. So at a glance, Lunch Break is about adultery, but it's actually about identity and how quarantine seemed to have made us all reflect about our lives. I have immense interest in psychology. And according to several specialists that I talked to, the two hottest topics of reflection during this pandemic were careers and romantic relationships. Many people realized that they hated their jobs and finally had the courage to leave them. And others realized that they had unhappy relationships. Many left, and those who couldn't, now more aware of their unhappiness, were more prone to find escapes. So there was the inspiration. Several articles, including one in the New York Times, like a month after pandemic start, saying that the pandemic would reinvent all the relationships. So I also discovered that it was normal after life-threatening situations like a war, or in our case, a pandemic, that people would have a greater urge to enjoy life and solve their problems. So I created a plot that would offer dangerous but possibly effective situations to these two problems, the bad job and the bad marriage, for our two main characters. So one of them is so desperate about her wasted career, let's say it this way, she's willing to be dishonest and unethical to finally make it. And the other one is so disillusioned in her broken marriage that she's willing to take big chances to feel alive again. So this book is basically about a journey of this embarking on this process of reflection, experimenting, and facing the consequences of our choices. All universal feelings and needs. And I thought this story would be fun and relatable to readers of all backgrounds. So there you are.
Great, Liza, thank you. Now our guest specialist is Dr. Ann Turner, a Washington, D.C. based psychotherapist who works with teens and adults having relationship and sexual issues. So we do have a few questions for you. So the first one, how did the pandemic impact romantic relationships?
Yeah, so it was a mixed bag. I feel like the best analogy would be a house in a storm. So if your house had a good foundation, like maybe a 10-year partnership or marriage or a 20-year marriage, you probably did okay because you have that foundation. But if you had cracks and crevices and you already had problems with communication or divvying up who's taking care of the kids, you put the pandemic on top of that, or even as Lisa's mentioning, chronic illness or getting a diagnosis, all those things just pile on the stress that we're all already dealing with the pandemic. And the affair situation is interesting because some people, as Liza said, had affairs and decided, actually, now I want to commit to my partner as opposed to continuing the affair. And other people just took a little pause until vaccines came out, and then they went back to either open marriages and or affairs. But during that difficult time, which is probably when Liza was thinking her story up and starting to write it, there was this kind of pressure cooker because affairs actually provide an outlet for people. And so if you cut that off, which happened when everybody was worried about getting sick, so they didn't go outside of their relationships, they kept their relationships inwards. And that's very stressful for a marriage that's already, or a relationship where you normally have that kind of, I hate to say safety valve of an affair, but that's kind of what it is. So yeah, that's generally what happened with relationships.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. So what can couples do to help pandemic-proof their relationship for future crises?
Well, a lot of people, when they come in either individually with couple problems or they come in as a couple, tend to point the finger at the other person, wishing they would change or do something different or send me flowers and what I say is take responsibility for your own happiness. And instead of pushing it on someone else, expecting them to fulfill you. I really don't even like that expression. It's like you're in charge of your own fulfillment and your partner is just someone who enhances it. And also, if you work on your own happiness, you also become more attractive to your spouse as opposed to complaining to them about more things they're not doing right. And that's why I'm writing the book on happiness and divorce.
Do you have any advice to give to single people who are struggling with online dating?
When you do start getting together with people, and even when you communicate with them, listen to what they say, watch what they do. People are telling you who they are, whether it's texting you constantly or not texting you enough, or someone might show up late to the first date and they're like, oh my God, I can never get anywhere on time. They're telling you, I'm always late. So are you okay with that? Fine. If you're always late, that might work. But if that drives you bonkers, then this might not be the person for you. I remember going on a date where someone said, I said, oh, how many kids do you have? And they were like, I have 3 kids. And oh my gosh, they all have issues. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, well, I'm a therapist, but I really don't want to be in a relationship with someone where I have to provide therapy to my partner's children. So listen what they say, watch what they do, how they treat the waitress, the service people, wherever you go. They're showing you who they are. Because a lot of people are sort of in denial about that. I know when I talk to them about people and I hear what they're doing, I'm like, well, can't you see? They're telling you who they are. They've been telling you all along. And then the last thing I'd say to give people hope, and I feel like it's true, is every pot has its lid. There's a person for everybody. And so just keep trying. And I kept trying to go, I was about to go off the apps, and that's actually when I met my husband at I was so fed up and I was like, this is driving me crazy. And then finally I met him and I thought, wait a minute, this isn't any work. And I wasn't getting, I wasn't wondering, well, does he like me, or are we going to see each other again, or he's too much? And that's exactly when it happened. So just sort of keep trying.
So great. Now we'd like to hear from the audience. So I'm handing it over to Candy Cross to start our Q&A. Hey, Candy.
Good evening, everyone. Lots of questions brewing. Liza, with this pandemic era suspense, do you plan on doing more of this angle? More
Definitely.
of this era? The emotional and the psychological and the social aspects of this pandemic, which most people are afraid to talk about, but I think most people want to know about.
Definitely, Candy. As Sergey mentioned, I lived in different countries and all, and whoever I talk to, the personal dilemmas during the pandemic are the common denominator every time. I believe stories about the social impact of the pandemic are totally cross-cultural, and they are as relevant now as they will be in decades when people are trying to understand what we went through. So since my genres are drama, suspense, and romance, I can diversify, but keep this core subject somehow, the perception of how is life at home, which kind of frictions started then, because it's not something that happened only during quarantine. It started there, it was the worst of it, but then we had to adjust to an entirely different life. So yes, I want to write several more novels on the pandemic subject. One right now is in progress, and I have two others already outlined in the past 2 or 3 months. Yeah, excited about it.
Giselle is asking, Dr. Turner, red flags do come up during the dates, but when you're in love, it's difficult to see them. We probably all know this. Do you agree? Any advice here?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, you know, there's a chemical reason that we overlook them because you've got those endorphins, like you're excited, it's all new. And there's actually a reason. That's one of the reasons you should date someone for like 2 years before you settle down in any way, because you want to see them through the seasons. You don't want to make any snap judgments. You might find out they have another family or another all kinds of secrets, or go through some holidays with them. So yes, you're right. That's why I mentioned that actually, because when you hear yourself, that's the benefit of therapy too, is when you hear yourself describing someone, you realize, oh, wait a minute, there are some red flags, if not many red flags.
So when you say when there are red flags, heed them. Sometimes it's not so cut and dry. Can you talk a little bit about your own experience or where you, in hindsight, should have done differently, for example?
I went out with someone and I remember, we were having a good time, but he was there was something, wasn't something quite right. He was never asking me about me. It was more focused. I'm pretty good at asking people questions because that's what I do for a living. And, so I remember kind of getting like tired on the date, like thinking, oh, he's not really asking me stuff. And so then I was like, I should go because I have to go to work tomorrow. And I remember leaving and he got so angry all of a sudden. Like he was very nice and charming and totally fine for say 2 hours. And then I said, well, it's like a Tuesday night or something. I've got to go home. And he got really mad at me, and he didn't hurt me or anything crazy. But I thought, wow, this is just a date. If you're going to get that pissed off, like, what's wrong with you? So anyway, but I left. I was like, okay, well, I've got to go. I left, and he started like angry texting me, and I just didn't answer him. And that's another thing that I have women do a lot. A lot of clients, they answer them. If you don't know someone and they're acting crazy, don't answer them. If it's like behaviorists, right? You don't give a mouse a piece of cheese. You don't, if you respond even a little, like, why are you getting so angry? You're starting the reaction over and over. So here's the funny thing is, so I never responded to him. He woke up the next day, very apologetic. Someone else might have said, oh, I'm going to give him a chance. He just had a bad night. And I'm like, no, I'm a therapist. If you get that pissed off about like this simple thing, like you're trouble. And fast forward. So like, I think 3 months or 6 months, I used to work at Discovery Channel. I was their therapist on site when they had an office here. And he was there meeting with someone, and he was sort of on the sidewalk, and I just walked by and he said hi. And I said hi and I was cordial and I just kept going. Like that was, someone where I knew there were red flags.
I have one more question for you, Dr. Turner, then I'm going to go back to Liza, our featured author tonight. Dr. Turner, what is your vision of the future for relationships in the post-pandemic?
Liza actually touched on really good points, which is the pandemic forced us to really think, what do we want? And so if going back to the example of affairs and her book, you can think, do I want an open relationship? Is this not enough for me? Or like the example I gave of one of my patients shut down their affair. They'd been having this affair and they sort of saw themselves with this other person. And they decided, you know what? I have kids with this other person and I'm going to stay on that track A, let's call it. Yeah, so I feel like the future is really thinking about what you want out of life, because we know life's short, and same thing with careers too.
We're getting some heavy psychological questions, just FYI.
Well, narcissist and everything else, keep them coming. My new book now, the psychological thriller, you're going to answer your questions and I'll also learn. It's really great because it's an interesting subject. I mean, just to give you a small pause to Dr. Turner, what I'm saying now, doing my own research on this character who has bipolar disorder, I like to write fiction in a way that, yes, it's fiction. Yes, we can inflate a little here and there, but I don't want to be surreal, because as a reader, I'm very tough on what I'm reading. If it's something starts going too crazy, I say, oh, come on, it was so good up to here. Now it's starting all the BS. So I try to talk to doctors, to specialists, to get the most of what they have. Then, yes, there is somebody with bipolar disorder that just causes trouble. Others will be locked in a room. But there are a lot of sociopaths out there. Some have bipolar disorder, some are narcissists, some are something else. So for fiction, you can get a few of these characteristics to write something that's going to be worth your time, since you have so many options of books, to spend your 5 or 6 hours reading an entire novel. You want something that's not what you hear all the time, either in the news or, in conversations with your friends. So it needs to have that exaggeration a little bit. They be different a little bit, but it has to be real. And doing this research, I was really very surprised on how many people pass as normal, because they are extremely sexy and attractive in other ways, like great conversation. And when we read about sociopaths, we see that they tend to be charming. So they don't need to be the worst killer, don't need to be Ted Bundy's and become like, psychopaths. But even among us, there are so many people, and that happens a lot in dating sites, that you see, and you see the red flags, but they're so sexy, they're so wonderful. They seem to be great in everything else. Oh, nobody's perfect. So we overlook here, today, tomorrow. We also want to be in a relationship. So after a while, when you are in love, then it's too late. And even talking to Dr. Turner, we were discussing about that previously. There are a lot of things that chemically happen in our brains. Like even when you start having sex with somebody and get physically attached, also you are more likely to excuse things if that's amazing. So I'm studying a lot of that for Cutting Edge and all this couples thing. So I thought it was very interesting to see that you can write a very interesting psychological thriller just with a couple. So much stuff can come out of that if somebody is mentally that unstable, but still attractive and interesting enough for us to believe the other normal part would stay. So back to Dr. Turner.
For you, Liza, that they're listening to this and they're also wondering if you related to a certain character that you wrote about in Lunch Break in particular, or if this was a combo, because you have very strong characters in this with a quite a compact, delicious plot that's not so extensive, but that really like ropes you in.
Well, without any spoilers here, I mean, we have basically 3 women characters that I think are interesting here. One who was an amazing woman, and then something happens to her and she doesn't identify herself anymore as that person. So she kind of goes crazy and it's able of anything. We have another one who start thinking I'm 40 something and my life really doesn't turn out to be what I expected. I studied so hard, I have all these diplomas, I'm still attractive, and I need to do something. So she's willing to do everything. And a third one that everything came out perfectly until something happens to her partner and she says, I have to be here watching this because I'm in love with this person. So thank God none of them are exactly me, but I could relate with some of the traits of a few things. For those who know me and know the charity work that I used to do many years ago, I was extremely sick, and then I started doing work with cancer patients and everything else. So this is a very close subject to me. I met people that had different problems, from cancer and severe depression, MS, other things, and what they told me about that, how much that changed their lives. And so I highly related to that, to the portion that touched my own health, and for this extensive work that I still do with people. So I wanted to put a little bit of that in the story, and I did, without telling too much about the plot for those who didn't read it. Mm-hmm. But so I use a little bit of that. And the other characters, what I feel close is this. I think during the pandemic, there was not one person that, no matter how happy they were, they didn't put a micro lens and saw everything. Relationship, life. A lot of people, a lot of our friends moved to different cities. I'm here in New York to enjoy ABCD. What if I have to change all that and then I'm not enjoying the best of this city? Is that worth it, paying so much money to live here? Same happened to friends of mine that live in London, Paris, other expensive capitals. Some people decide that, yeah, I wanted to have this crazy career that was all my money, all my time, but maybe it's time to really have that baby we have been postponing, or that trip, or that family thing. So in short, answering your question, I think a few traits of them were familiar to me and people that I talked to, and I just tried to create a very strong character. For me, it's very easy to imagine one situation, and then slowly, as I start going to a certain place and write my outline, to make those characters become real, because as I create them, I start asking questions. If that was real, okay, that person I invented, it's just a little skeleton. I have 3 characteristics, but it can't be only that. Let's assume it's a real woman. Let me ask her questions. So my own process of creating that person along the outline, it's not only scenes. So I start putting all the emotions that a real woman would do. And at a certain point, I really feel like I know those characters. So I don't have any specific formula for that. It just happens as I start putting together the location and who is going to interact with whom. When I do an outline, for instance, I just know how the story starts, what's going to happen in the center of the story, the middle, that's important, and how it ends. Because if I like the message in the end, I in my mind as a creator, I think that it's like I'm remembering a story that I heard long ago. So that's how it comes to me. It's just like, oh, I heard that story when I was 15 years old. It was so cool. I remember the end. I remember those characters. But then because I don't remember all the actions because it was 30 years ago, then I will create those actions. Like Mary meets John. I don't remember where anymore. So I'm going to create that now. That's the creative process. But I do know they meet and I know how it ends. So that helps me doing this kind of process.
Profound, and that's a wonderful segue to a question that I'm getting from Brian on, are you open to questions about facelift as well, because they're coming?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have the co-author here too.
Yeah, Trace,
up to it, right?
In the house. Thank you for being here, Trace. So Brian is asking, Liza, talk us through some of your most profound discoveries while working on facelift.
In the sense of the body culture beauty thing, or in general?
Yeah, your research as well. Yes.
Yeah, the story is, as I emphasize, it's about beauty and wealth and the extremes people can get to come to these two things. So, what helped me for this one, other than a research I did in Rio many years ago with specifically with plastic surgeons. When I was in graduate school, I went to business school. After I went to literature, photography, I went to business school, and actually I worked in corporate most of my life. At a certain point, when I was doing like post-graduation courses, I did 1 year of studies on the plastic surgery industry in Rio de Janeiro for mega wealthy women. And the way it came out was because one marketing company wanted me to do this study about what's the number one item that Brazilian mega wealthy women like to buy. And I thought would be something in the land of shoes or clothes, I don't know. And it turned out to be plastic surgery. And I say, oh, wow, okay. And it was very common, but at the same time, it was a lot of a surprise for me. So what happened was I spent 1 whole year doing this study, and I learned a lot. And now when we could use this, it was remembering that study. And the other thing that helped was the protagonist, the male protagonist, is that kind of man that's obsessed with becoming wealthy. And he's a middle-class guy, mega smart, genius, doctor, and he will do anything to become rich. And with that, I kind of borrowed information from some personal experience working for 15 years for an American company that did business in Europe with the mega wealthy oil and gas. And our clients were all really super, super wealthy. So nobody in particular, but I could see mega wealthy pretty close, like being yachts and private jets and be in that life of south of France parties and Formula One races and all the fantastic that everybody says, oh, that's so great. Not that much when you're there working and those people are your bosses. But I learned, and that was my early 30s and early 40s. And so I got a lot of information to make this real. How does it look like? Even though that was not valid to me, thank God, I wanted to have a wonderful career. I wanted to be well-traveled, sophisticated, but, have the latest Chanel bag was not in my priority list. But I knew a lot of people who were there, and they would do anything for a piece of jewelry or anything for a new wardrobe, and men that would do anything for the right job. So really anything. So I cannot go much further than that, but I can tell you that personal experience.
I think we got it.
Yeah, helped me see both worlds pretty well, both the beauty and the wealth. And I think it was really great. I think Trace raised your hand at some point there. I think he wanted to start. Can we unmute you somehow? I'm sorry, my friend, to oppression here.
Trace, you have 5 moments to talk. We've got some more questions coming in.
I'm a lawyer, so I like to talk too much, and these ladies know they gotta rein me in. No, I used to be a med mal defense lawyer, so I have a lot of experience with plastic surgeons. So my experience along with Liza's was amazing. Perfect collaboration.
Wonderful. You, thank you. Liza, we have a comment and a question from Tracy. She's saying that she read your book. She loves it. Absolutely loves it. She is wondering if you're going to do or would consider a continuation of Lunch Break.
A few people asked me about that. And for those who read it, we know why. But I think for now, I would like to keep it in our imagination. As you know, I can't talk more because some people here didn't read, but we can only imagine some of the difficulties that new relationship would have. So I think I would love to believe that they are very bright, enlightened people who would be able to keep the love flowing and handling the difficulties very well without me directing them. So for now, no, but maybe in the future we will think that.
We've got several more questions for you, Liza, but I will go to Ed, who is asking how you came to the title of your book, which
Oh,
is
yes.
an
Well,
excellent question, and everybody
this
always asks this in the book industry.
this one is a bit cruel, as you see, even the tagline, ready for couples therapy. So ironic, right? Lunch break, ready for couples therapy, because most couples that go through difficulty, they say, let's try couples therapy. And normally when you get to this point, I mean, some work, as Dr. Turner said, the person who normally cause more trouble needs to want it, because if the other person is dragging them, it's not going to work. It's going to be basically a waste of time. But answering your question, the idea was lunchtime is a time that we are not watching. So if there were this app that would be promoting something discreet, you see, for those who read it, it's not a dating app or let's have quickie sex app. The idea is have an adventure with like-minded married people who don't want to leave their partners, don't want trouble. You just want to go there. You may or may not have sex. You want to live the fantasy of feeling young, feeling attractive again, if your partner is not providing that. And you don't want to live the relationship. So tell me, and all of us here, married or in a relationship, if you tell your partner once a week or every other week, hey, I'm going out at night with whom? Just hanging out, we have trouble. But how many of us ask our partners what they are doing at lunch hour? That answers your question. So an app that would be like, the name is Sanctuary, meaning own your pleasure, rule your life without hurting somebody else, which is a tall order, which we all know it's equally dishonest. But the idea is, if it's inevitable to live an adventure, even just once, to see who you are. Let's say after 20 years of marriage, you don't receive a compliment from your partner. You don't have sex for 2 years, whatever it is. You may not know if something is wrong with you or with them, because some people are so cruel, right, Dr. Turner, that on top of not delivering, they tell you it's your fault. So the Sanctuary app was designed for people that also might want to figure out, is that really my fault? Am I still desirable? Am I this idiot that my partner is telling me? So it's not only, I want to diversify and leave my poor, good partner at home. No, it's something like this. So the idea is during lunch hours, you would have an opportunity to do something discreet that would have less chance of being caught. The app, if you read the book, they suggest that you never meet the same person again. So, and if we are in the same position, we're both married and we want only that, there is a bigger chance that I'm not going to bother you afterwards and you're not going to bother me.
So I just want to point out that you're getting lots of interesting looks on the screen. I want to remind everybody, this is fiction, this book.
Okay. Well, people are like, oh, I never thought of that. I'm going to use my lunch hour better.
However, food for thought, lunch break, not the nighttime, okay, which we all think about. So you are still getting a flood of questions. I just want to remind everybody, as we're kind of nearing wind down to this wonderful book launch event, that Liza will definitely stay on longer to answer your questions, and perhaps even we can persuade Dr. Turner. But I also want to reiterate that reviews are golden when it comes to the book industry, because that is the direct line to visibility to the book and media placement. So please, if you read the book or have read the book, leave a review or at least leave your ratings of 5 stars on Amazon. Thanks so much. So Leslie is coming in with, she loved the book. She read it this weekend, and she wants to know, Liza, can you describe your process in writing this book? How long did it take you? Did you knock it out of the park in a couple of sittings, or was it a short period of time and then you went back and evaluated what you wrote?
Thank you, Leslie. This one was pretty fast. I put in mind that I had so many ideas about the quarantine that I wanted to write a collection of 10 short stories. And I actually started a few of them. They were more like, other subjects. But when I got to lunch break, it was becoming something a little stronger, and there was so much more to talk that soon there were much more than the limit of a short story. So as you can see, I mean, this is a novella. Lunch Break is actually like 100 something pages. It's not like a 300 page like a Facelift and others we're going to do. It's pretty modest, this one. But it was a good idea that I thought should be shared. It was a good story. And even though it was in this in-between that doesn't have much of a market for it, it's not like a short story or a novel, I wanted to bring it out. So in terms of time, I sat during the pandemic, and now I started having these ideas. And when it came to mind that I wanted to write about adultery, what I did is I sat down and I started thinking, how can I approach that in a way that's believable, but not the same things that we hear about every day. And I started thinking, and then finally came the idea of the app. Now, okay, who is going to be A and B? And then I wanted to do something first, girl meets boy, but then I said, I want something more complicated. So I inserted other elements. So it took me like a week or 10 days to have the general premise in mind. And then I did a very superficial outline. As I say, I don't go outline scene by scene, but let me think of an end for that. If I can see an end, I can see the middle. So it would start like with the app, and then it's going to end that way. All right, so let's see the options I have. So let's see, it took me like a month and a half, working like 4 hours a day to put it all on paper. And then I came back to that, like first let it chill. Best way to review a book is like leave it alone for a few weeks, if you can, 2-3 months. And then I was working on something else, came back. And then last year I was working other things. And then in the end of last year, I decided to publish this book. Normally it's 1 month to 2 months to put the initial idea on paper. If it's a longer story like Facelift or something, sometimes it take 1 or 2 months to sitting like 5 hours a day. I'm talking full-time commitment. I can pretty much write the entire book in like 1 to 2 months, and then give it a rest and come back for 2 big revisions, and then share it. I always like to do also what I call my, soundboard. So give to 5 or 6 people that I consider very intelligent, preferably from the industry, to read it and say, does it make sense? It's just in my head. And then they say, yeah, you're in a good way. And some little ideas. And then I come back and refine. And then the last one is editing, that as English is not my first language, I send it over to the American editors to do the copy editing. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Dr. Ann Turner, the fabulous one. Thank you so much for your
Thank you, Doctor.
tips tonight.
Thank you.
It's rare that we have this literally insider information on relationships, sex, divorce, all things once in a lifetime pandemic as well when it comes to partnerships. And ultimately, Liza Andrews, the author of Lunch Break, a pandemic era romantic suspense. Please read it. I hope all of you review it.
So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate that. And for those who can stay a little bit longer, and if you want to ask more questions or anything, I'll be glad to stay. Just formally closing the event and thanking everybody. Sometimes when people say, hey, this part here doesn't really work, it's when you start creating that antibody. And then when you read, sometimes, even when I'm writing something, I still remember great readers that helped me in the past. One of them is Chris. It's like, oh, I think Chris wouldn't like that. She would think this and that. And Stephen King says that when we write, we should have some smart readers in mind. So it's good when you have this community, because you know more or less, you cannot obviously please every reader, but when you have a couple of friends or a book club or people that are always evaluating your work, you start seeing what kind of stuff. Oh, that person is sensitive to dialogue. That other one doesn't like when the villain is too central casting. And then when you have that in mind, it helps your creative and your writing process. So yes, I would love to have that.
Well, I'm still waiting for you to finish those books from the very beginning because I'm a big
Yes.
fan.
Yes.
And I love those stories from the very
Yes,
beginning.
thank you.
And
Once I spent like a month in Venice writing a young adult right after Twilight and all, and then I said, well, no more vampires or anything, but maybe I'll write something about this. And I
amazing,
wrote something about a curse, and it was one of the times
amazing,
that she was like, it was fun location, you
amazing.
know, yeah.
I just think you're super talented. I always say this to you, and I'm saying this
Thank
in front
you.
of everybody else. You're super talented and you do great things in life. You already are. And I'm so proud of you because I've known you for so many years and I know how much you can do. And, we're just lucky that, you started coming out with those books and your stories because people need to read them and people need to know how talented you are. So I'm
Thank you so
really,
much, Chris. You
really
are
happy this
one
is
of the
happening for
smartest
you.
women that I know. So coming from you, it's a big compliment. Thank you so much. Thank you. I was reading about people that said, I have absolutely no intention of not even meeting that person I'm having an interaction online, a romantic interaction online. I just want that fantasy that when everybody goes to bed, I have my lover. And then that person pays compliments that my husband doesn't. That person understands me in a way that doesn't. We go on and on with that. And I think all of us always had that kind of person, either we are single or not, whatever, each one is in a different situation. But since the 2000s, when this became normal, we all had some kind of infatuation with somebody online. I had a big one 20 years ago, and it was like ridiculous. Never met the person, was completely going crazy there. And for like every night, hey, how are you? Hey, how are you? And you never see the person, but that's very fulfilling, more than other people. And then in those cases, somebody lived in a different country or city, and you find yourself saying, you know what, right now, either I'm not ready to have an in-person relationship, even if you're single, or I believe for those who are married in a relationship they cannot leave, that would be something of a possibility, a little mental escape, and as respectful as possible, as long as it's not something I'm going to actually act on it. So I don't know. I mean, did
Well,
anyone
having
ever
having
said
those
anything about this?
texts and exchanges is the same thing as eating a piece of candy, a piece of chocolate, having sex. It's all dopamine, and so of course it feels good to have someone give. Yeah.
I was always a big fan of the 20s, the roaring 20s.
Yeah.
So I was joking with my close friends and say I'm living my roaring 20s 100 years later. Go to bed, 2022, so it's almost there. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, wonderful evening for you.